So just to kind of get you caught up on where we are historically, the Jews have been allowed to return to Jerusalem. You remember that they had worshipped idols for hundreds of years, and then God's wrath was poured out on them. First, the northern kingdom was exiled to Babylon. Then the southern kingdom was the northern kingdom was exiled to Assyria. Then the southern kingdom was exiled to Babylon. Around 587, 586, the Jerusalem temple was destroyed. But then the people were allowed to go back. And a lot of Jews came back, and they rebuilt the temple around 515, March of 515. But a lot of Jews have decided to stay in exile for one reason or another, and Esther and Mordecai are two of those Jews who never went back. But now they're on the rise. Now, we saw already in Esther that Esther has, and the language that's used is in modern language is that she was beautiful of face and form. So she had a beautiful face and a beautiful body, whatever that meant in 6th century BC, Persia. She enters into the king's harem. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? For a Jewish woman who's supposed to be a believer to enter into a king's harem of women, what do you think, ladies? Is that the life of a godly woman? Not so much, not so much. She spends a year preparing for the king's bedroom, and she pleases him more than all the other women, and she becomes queen. So she becomes like the figurehead, the royal figurehead of all of Persia. And Mordecai is becoming something of a hero as well at this point, because he finds out about a plot to kill the king. Anyone remember the king's name? You don't have to pronounce it right. Anyone remember the king's name? Ahasuerus. Mordecai finds out about this plot to kill Ahasuerus and saves his life. But then, he never gets rewarded. He never gets rewarded for it. It gets written down, and that's kind of what we talked about last week. It gets written down in the Chronicles of the Kings of Persia, and that's going to come into play later on. But for now, his work kind of goes unseen. And we sometimes know that experience. You do something for the Lord. Now listen, you don't want to do something for the Lord just to be seen. You want to be seen by God, not men. If you're seen by men and you get your reward by men, you already have your reward, Jesus says. But sometimes you're doing the work of God and it feels like it just goes unrewarded. And that's just how life is sometimes. It's what it is. Esther and Mordecai, my argument has been, up to this point in the book, that Esther and Mordecai are compromisers, that they have to know it's wrong to marry an unbeliever. They have to know it's wrong for Esther to be in the situation that she's in, but they, as far as we could tell from reading the book, they don't seem bothered by the situation. Instead, they seem rather content with the situation. And the way I read it is, it seems to me, and I've used the word opportunists. It seems to me that they're opportunists. It seems to me that Esther has an opportunity to get out of the life of a poor exile and into a life of royalty and luxury. It's hard not to read it that way. One of the biggest hints for me that Esther and Mordecai aren't living in godliness, up to this point that they are not living in godliness, is the fact that they've hidden who they are. They've hidden their lineage. That changes today. But up to this point, they've hidden their lineage. And that really is about to come back on them, because had they revealed their lineage previously, had Esther revealed her lineage previously, things might not play out the way they play out. Had the king known that his wife was a Jew, maybe the story changes. I would think almost certainly the story would change. And the fact that they've been quiet about it, and the fact that Esther's been quiet about it, that's about to haunt them to a certain extent. Anyway, we left off with chapter 2 where Mordecai saves the king's life, gets no reward. You would expect him to be promoted at some level, but instead of Mordecai getting promoted, a guy named Haman gets promoted. And if you read the Bible, you know Haman. Haman is now, we get introduced to what we're going to call the main antagonist of the story, at least for a good while of Esther. He's like the Darth Vader character? I don't know. Who's the bad guy? Who's the bad guy in Lord of the Rings? I can't remember. Sauron? He's the Sauron character. If maybe not quite. I don't know. He's a bad guy. He's a bad guy. That's pretty clear. And like a weaselly bad guy too on top of it. Esther 3:1. After these events, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, and advanced him and established his authority over all the princes who were with him. So Haman is not a good guy. Now, if we were going to have tests, we would have some guys in the chapter 1 and some eunuchs and some names of different people that would not be on the test because they're kind of like secondary characters. They're kind of like prop characters. But if we were going to have a test in the book of Esther, this guy would be on it. Okay, he would be a major part of that test. You might even have an essay question on this guy and some stuff about this guy. He's not a good guy. He's proud. He's arrogant. The way I read it, this guy kind of sees himself as God's gift to Persia. And the scriptures say that he's an Agagite. Now, you read that, and if you're anything like me, I read it and I just ignore it. So if I'm reading through the Bible, I'm like, okay, after these events, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman, and got advanced. Like you read the other part, but you don't think about the other part. You don't think about, okay, Hammedatha and the Agagite. And I don't really know who those people are. I don't really care who those people are. Let me read the stuff that matters. Is that how you guys read it? Anyone else willing to admit that you read it that way? Who stops and says, nope, I am not reading the rest of this verse until I figure out who these people are? Anyone do that? I do it a little bit. When I'm reading, I don't do it. When I'm studying, I say, okay, I should probably figure out who these people are. What if someone asks me and I don't know? So sorry, but that's just the way the sinful flesh works. Like, I don't want to be embarrassed. I should probably know who these people are. Maybe that's my main motivation, unfortunately, but maybe sometimes I'm just like, I just want to know who they are. How does this contribute to the situation? Well, we may not make a connection here, but there are two Agags in the Bible. One of them is entirely insignificant. You would never even think twice about the guy in Numbers 24:7. We would read the name, and we have nothing on it, and we don't really care anything about it. But there's another one that is of significance. Can anyone remember, and this is like a Bible trivia for 800 type. Maybe not quite 1,000, but maybe 1,000, depending on how lenient you are. This is a Bible trivia for 800, without looking it up, without doing an AI search. Can anyone remember? If you already looked it up, don't answer. Not yet. Anyone remember an Agag in the Bible? You have to go deep. And when you hear it, you'll be like, yep, I knew it. That's exactly it. But you may not make the connection right off the bat. Go ahead, Brian. You got to speak up just a little bit.
Last thing that come to my mind is one of the kings that Joshua and the Israelites took out.
Not Joshua, but you're right about a king. All right, we're getting closer. What do you have? We're getting a little further away. He was a king. And anyone else want to? All right. Now I'm going to open it up to people who looked it up. What's that? under the time of Saul. Tell us something about this. What do we know? Saul was told to wipe out all the Amalekites, but he didn't wipe out King Agag, and he didn't wipe out, what else didn't he wipe out? All the good stuff, right? And Samuel, right? Samuel comes back, and Samuel's like, what is the bleating of the sheep that I hear? And Saul's like, well, the people, you blame the people, right? The people didn't want to. And does anyone remember, and why is King Agag still alive when you were told to wipe out all the Amalekites? And does anyone remember what Samuel did? What was that? I prefer the more detailed answer. Someone said, who said kill? Did you say kill? Who said kill? Being nice. But he hacked him, how's the scripture say? To pieces. Who said pieces? He hacked him to pieces. So, the Bible's not always G-rated, okay? PG-13, I don't know, maybe you'd get an R rating for hacking someone to pieces. I don't know what that would have, I don't know exactly what that looked like, but I've got a picture in my mind of Samuel going in there and, hacking the guy to pieces. I don't know. Maybe you have a different picture, but that's what we see. Samuel does this. He kills Agag to avert God's wrath. You could read about that in 1 Samuel 15, if anybody's interested in going back and looking at it later on, 1 Samuel 15. Anyway, if Haman comes from this Agag, then he's an Amalekite. If he doesn't come from this, there's another way to read this. So you could say Haman comes from the line of the Amalekites. Another way to read this, another type of a way of writing this account would be that Agag and the Amalekites were longtime enemies of the Jews. And to call Hamadatha an Agagite could just be a way of identifying this family as an enemy of the Jews. So whichever one you want to hold to is whatever. But it seems pretty clear that this guy is an enemy of the Jews, and he's called an Agagite. So Haman gets promoted, and all the king's servants pay homage to him except Mordecai in verse 2. All the king's servants who were at the king's gate bowed down and paid homage to Haman, for so the king had commanded concerning him. So this was like a royal decree. But Mordecai neither bowed down nor paid homage. So there are a couple of ways of reading this. There's a couple of ways of reading what's going on with Mordecai at this point. Either one, he's finally doing something right. Up to this point, he's been quiet about everything. He's been quiet about his lineage. He told Esther, hey, don't tell people who we are. So now, either one, he's finally doing something that's right. He exposed the plot to kill the king. That was right. And he's building upon that. And not being willing to bow down to any man, only to the Lord. Now, you might say that's a stretch. You might say, well, is that really the motivation here, that he's not willing to bow down? I mean, has he bowed down to the king? I don't know. I don't know the answer there. But there's another way of reading Mordecai here, and it's a less friendly way of reading his actions. It may just be that he's just not willing to bow down to an Amalekite. Maybe he's willing to bow down to the king. He's just not willing to bow down to this guy, of all people, an enemy. Some people could read it as pride or whatever else. But bowing down was a sign of respect in Persia. It wasn't necessarily the same as worshiping. So it could just be like, no, I don't have respect for this guy, and I'm not bowing down to him. I don't know which of the two ways to read it. It doesn't really affect the story a ton. But what I do know is that Haman, from what I read in the scripture, Haman is not worthy of respect, in my mind. This guy is he's a despicable person. He's an arrogant, evil, murderous person. But we don't really know why Mordecai would not bow down to him. We just know that he wouldn't bow down to him. And we know that it's connected to his lineage, which is finally going to come out. Well, this causes problems for Mordecai, and now he has to answer for his actions. Then the king's servants who were at the king's gate said to Mordecai, "Why are you transgressing the king's command?" So this is more, there's a royal decree here. Now there's what some people might call, like, maybe you'd use the term civil disobedience. So, however you want to interpret Mordecai's actions here, the king has made a decree and Mordecai is disobeying it. And that could have some serious ramifications for him. And so not only does he have to answer to these servants, but now he has to deal with Haman. Now, it was when they had spoken daily to him and he would not listen to them, that they told Haman to see whether Mordecai's reason would stand, for he had told them that he was a Jew. And so day after day, these servants are starting to like, hey, what gives here? Why are you not bowing down? Why are you disobeying the decree of the king? And eventually, at some point or another, he tells them that he's a Jew. So if we're reading this text naturally, then we start to read a little bit of positivity into Mordecai's life. We start to see, okay, well, yeah, up to this point, they've made a lot of compromises, but now there's at least some connection to his heritage as to why he's not bowing down. Maybe some connection to his faith. Maybe it is that Mordecai sees it as wrong to bow down before any person. Similar to what we saw like in the book of Daniel. Up to this point, we saw, remember we talked about Esther, like, man, you would think she would just say, no, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to be part of this royal harem and face the consequences like Daniel and his 3 friends did. Well, maybe now Mordecai's finally getting there. People change, people grow. Maybe it's that he's finally doing something right. But whatever the case is, they find out that he's a Jew. They still don't know his relationship with Esther, but they know that he's a Jew, and that's connected to why he won't bow down. And when Haman finds out, Haman is filled with rage. You ever get filled with rage? Has anyone here never been filled with rage before? Never once in your life? We all know the experience of rage. Every single one of us at some point or another in our life have experienced rage. Something happens and you just like allow yourself to give into the thing and you just anger, wrath, rage. We've all felt it before. Hopefully we don't live in that type of experience because that's a work of the flesh. But anyway, Haman finds out and his wrath ascends to the heavens. In verse 5, when Haman saw that Mordecai neither bowed down nor paid homage to him, Haman was filled with rage. He's furious. Mordecai owes me respect. Mordecai owes me honor. And so he's filled with rage. He hates Mordecai. And he wants Mordecai to pay. But it's not enough for just Mordecai to pay. He wants all the Jews to pay. He is so full of wrath, so full of anger, that he wants Mordecai to pay and everybody who's related to Mordecai to pay. Verse 6. But he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had told him who the people of Mordecai were. Therefore, Haman sought to destroy all the Jews, the people of Mordecai, who were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus. So he wants to kill Mordecai, and he wants to kill every Jew that's ever existed, or that exists. Who does that remind you of? You had to think of one historical figure who would wipe out all the Jews. Who would you think of? I would think of Hitler. So Hitler's the answer. I would think of Hitler. Maybe you have someone else, Goebbels, I don't know. Maybe there's someone else, one of these guys. But Boring, is that one of the guy? And there's another guy. What's that? Himmler. I'm sure there were some others as well. But you think of these guys, these murderous, evil, satanic people, and Haman is an ancient version of Hitler, which, really, there is, if Haman comes from the line of Agag, there is a certain irony here because Israel had been commanded to utterly destroy the Amalekites, and now an Amalekite wants to utterly destroy Israelites. So that's an interesting thing there, but this is Satan's work. Satan's plan has always been to destroy God and God's people. And Satan's plan at this point in history is to wipe out the Jews. He wants to wipe out the Jews. He wants to wipe out Christians today. If it were up to Satan, every Christian would die, or their testimony would be so soiled that they would become completely ineffective in giving the gospel. Satan wants to destroy your testimony. He wants to ruin your testimony. If it were up to him, you'd be dead today. Or you would be so far away from God that you would turn people away from God by the way you live. That's what Satan wants. Haman is an agent of Satan. He's carrying out Satan's will, and he plots to wipe out all the Jews in verse 7. Verse 7. In the first month, which is the month Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, so this is like, for people who care about the years, it's 474 BC right now, which is a little around 5 years after Esther becomes queen. So Esther's been queen now for 5 years. So we've moved forward in time, from the time Esther became queen, we've moved forward in time 5 years. It's the 12th year of King Ahasuerus. Pur, that is the lot, was cast before Haman from day to day and from month to month until the 12th month, that is the month Adar. So this is the first month, which is in the Hebrew calendar, it's like March, April. The Passover takes place that month, which is a celebration of God's deliverance of the Jews from the iron furnace of Egypt, the celebration of Israel's birth as a nation. Well, Haman casts lots, and he wants to determine which month he would carry out his plot to wipe out the Jews. And there are a few different ways he would do this. I think one of the ways that would happen is you would have a bag, and you'd have rocks in the bag, and each month each rock would be labeled with each month, and you'd reach in and you'd pull out a month. That's one way that you would cast lots. Well, anyway, it's the 12th month that's chosen, and that's almost a year later. That gives like almost a whole year for the Jews to kind of respond, which if you think about the timing of God on this, Satan's plan, it's like Satan, if it were 2 months later or 1 month later, that gives you like no time. The lots cast for the 12th month, they have almost a whole year to kind of figure out how to respond to this. The longest time that's possible, that's available. Well, anyway, the date's picked, and check this out. Then Haman said to King Ahasuerus, "There is a certain people scattered and dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from those of all other people, and they do not observe the king's laws. So it is not in the king's interest to let them remain. It's not in the king's interest to let them live." In other words, we don't believe in Israel's right to exist. What does that sound like today? Who doesn't believe in Israel's right to exist today? Many Muslims. Name a few organizations that don't believe in Israel's right to exist today. Give me one. There's a few. Hamas. So is Hamas, are they good or bad? I don't know how anyone today could look at Hamas and be like, I think Hamas and Israel are equally bad. No, they're the bad guys. They don't believe in Israel's right to exist. If you gave Hamas all the weapons in the world, Israel would not exist. If you gave Israel all the weapons in the world, there would be peace. Hamas, who else doesn't believe in Israel's right to exist? Hezbollah. Who else? Is ISIS still really... There's still
A lot of anti-Israel Westerners.
there's some anti-Israel Westerners, maybe even some in the media. But what about the Republic of Iran? These are not good people. These are bad people. They're really, really bad people. And as many of our presidents have said, Iran can never get a nuclear weapon. You can't let these guys. These are bad people. But anyway, they don't believe in Israel's right to exist here. This is evil. If it is pleasing to the king, let it be decreed that they be destroyed. Let's kill them all. And I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who carry on the king's business to put into the king's treasuries. So these people, they don't observe the king's laws. They deserve to die. All of them, every single one of them. Not just the men. All of them. All of them. So the women and the children, let's kill them all. And 10,000 talents of silver is said to be something like $64 million in today's economy. Now, how do you think Haman would get that type of money to pay into the king's treasury? What do we think? From the Jews he killed. Let's take all the spoils of war. Let's kill all these people and take their money, and we'll take all their money. We'll take all the money that belongs to this people and we'll put it into the king's treasuries. Remember, it wasn't that long ago, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, that the king had gone to war with Greece, going all the way back to chapter 1. He had gone to war with Greece and lost. And that kind of, that hurt. And that took money out of the royal treasuries. That cost money. He came back in shame. The treasury was depleted. You wipe out all these people, you replenish your treasury. So economically, for the king, it's a good move. What is economically a good move is not always the right move, and that's still true today. Just because it makes sense economically doesn't mean that it's right. This one is clearly wrong. It doesn't take rocket science to figure that out. But when King Haman hears it, he likes the idea. I mean, how do you like this idea? I don't even understand that, but it kind of shows you what this guy is. Then the king took his signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews. The king said to Haman, "The silver is yours, and the people also, to do with them as you please." In other words, so he takes a signet ring, and that's like signing a document today. You put a piece of clay on a letter, and then you take the ring that has your seal on it, and you impress it upon the clay, and now you know that it's authentic from the king. It's basically putting the king's royal approval. And we'll finance everything up to this point, and then once you get all that money from the Jews, you can put it in the royal treasury. That's the idea that's going on here. And so the king agrees to the plan. Haman can use whatever resources he needs to carry this plan out, and the king makes a decree that the Jews would be put to death. Then the king's scribes were summoned on the 13th day of the first month. Now, it's the first month, which is, what happens in the first month? Passover. Does anyone remember what day of the month Passover is? This is probably Bible trivia for, let's call it 1,000. It's the 14th day. So that's a day before Passover, the day before the biggest celebration of the Jews. That would be like what's bigger, Resurrection Sunday, or I would say Resurrection Sunday is the biggest holiday for us. Some people might say Christmas. Maybe in practice, Christmas is a big deal. Let's call it Christmas for the sake of the argument, even though theologically it's certainly Resurrection Sunday. But, for most people, Christmas is like the biggest holiday of the year. So let's call it Christmas to really kind of put it in modern perspective. That would be like on Christmas Eve. Like, man, Christmas Eve. I love Christmas. Who else loves Christmas Eve? Especially there's a little football on. Love the Christmas Eve service, the candlelight service. Get together for the candlelight service, and a decree goes out that every single one of us would be destroyed. Every single one of us would die. Boy, that would change Christmas, wouldn't it, that year? Maybe opening presents the next day wouldn't really, Santa doesn't visit the funeral homes, little buddy, type of a thing, I don't know, whatever, Christmas would change that year. Well, here it is, the day before Passover. Then the king's scribes were summoned on the 13th day of the first month, and it was written just as Haman commanded to the king's satraps, to the governors who were over each province, and to the provinces, and to the princes of each people, each province according to its script, each people according to its language, being written in the name of King Ahasuerus, and sealed with the king's signet ring. In other words, we're going to put this in every language of the entire kingdom, so everyone, and that's a major undertaking. Every language that people speak, we're going to put this out there, that the Jews are going to get killed. Letters were sent by couriers to all the king's provinces to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate all the Jews, both young and old, women and children, in one day, the 13th day of the 12th month. So you have 11 months, and then you're all dead, which is the month Adar, and to seize their possessions as plunder, so that plunder would be taken into the king's treasury. A copy of the edict to be issued as law in every province was published to all the people so that they should be ready for this day. I mean, the king means business. He wants to wipe out all the Jews. It's like placing them under the ban, the law of Haman in the Old Testament. Doesn't matter how old you are, doesn't matter how young you are, doesn't matter if you're a woman or a child. That means I'm looking around this room. Tucker, you're dead. It just doesn't, it seems right, doesn't it? It's like, it's the one thing to, Paul and Joe and me and Tim and, some other people in here, kill the men. Now, it's not just enough to kill the men. Let's get all their wives too. But let's get Tucker. Let's get Wesley. Let's get everybody in there. Let's get Emily. Let's kill them all. Let's kill them all. G. We're going to kill G. I mean, it's just evil. This is how Satan works. You go back to the first century. You go back to the 1940s. You go back to the 1930s and 40s, and you ever see the propaganda? Kenny is dead. Kenny, you're done. She's waiting for her name to be called. You go back to the 30s and 40s. You ever go to a Holocaust museum? You ever see the pictures of the Jews? They make them look like monsters. They give them these big long beaks as noses and create this propaganda like try to make them less than human so it's easier for the people to kill them. This is how Satan works. When the people hear about it, the couriers went out impelled by, we read verse 14, right? Yeah. Copy of the edict to be issued. Yeah, we read that. The couriers went out impelled by the king's command while the decree was issued at the citadel in Susa. And while the king and Haman sat down to drink, the city of Susa was in confusion. They're shocked. What is all this? Why does the king want to wipe out these Jewish people? And if he'd wipe them out, man, are we next? So it's a scary time in the Persian Empire. Satan's goal has always been to destroy God's people. He's tried to destroy God's people in almost every era in history, in various and sundry ways. And today, his goal is to destroy Christians. And there is a movement in America that seeks to do the same thing, really. There are people in America, they are no friends of the church. They are no friends of Christianity. And they're putting out a media war against Christianity. Yeah, we're not here being, killed and persecuted and arrested for our faith. Not yet. But there's a media war against Christianity today. I would argue that the left, pretty clearly, the political left, is no friend. They are no friend of Christianity. And the media, at least the left is no friend of Christianity, hates Christianity. If it were up to them, we would be silenced. We would be labeled as people who have hate speech, and we would be thrown in prison if it were up to them. And that's Satan. Satan has them. Satan has them, and Satan wants to destroy you, and he wants to destroy your message. That is Satan's goal. It's similar here in the book of Esther, to destroy the Jews. And you have one guy who's risen to authority, who's risen to power, who has enough influence over the king, the most powerful person in all of Persia, to make it happen. Will he succeed? Well, if you've read through the Bible and you've read through Esther, you already know the answer. If you haven't, you'll find out. You'll find out. But until then, understand that God is sovereign in the affairs of men. God's over all it. He's over all of it. God sees everything that's happening. And though you won't see his name mentioned once throughout the book of Esther, by the end you'll see how God worked. And you'll see how God used even things that Esther and Mordecai did that were wrong, that God used even that stuff for good. And though Satan wants to destroy God's people and will do everything he can to make that happen, and though Satan wants to destroy you, and he'll do everything he can, ultimately, in the end, Satan cannot succeed. He won't win. In the end, after 1,000-year reign of Christ, after 1,000 years of Christ ruling on earth, Satan will be released from the bottomless pit, and he will gather up people, and they'll flock to him. After 1,000 years under Christ, they'll flock to him in rebellion against Jesus. But he'll be completely and utterly destroyed. He'll be cast into the lake of fire, and there will be perfect peace, and sin will be completely eradicated in a new heaven and new earth. And you can be part of that by placing your faith in Christ alone. Let's take our hymnals and turn to 452, close our service with a hymn. If you're not sure you're saved, then be sure to come and talk to me, or you're welcome to go talk to. We have a guy out in the foyer who could explain the gospel to you more clearly, or get you lined up with someone to explain the gospel to you. If there's sin in your life, if you're looking at your life and you're seeing compromise like what we saw in Esther and Mordecai's life, you're seeing maybe fear to tell people about the faith or whatever else, then while we're singing this hymn, you can repent, you can get right with the Lord right now. If you're finding Satan is you're drifting away and Satan is starting to ruin your testimony or using you to damage your testimony, then you can get right with the Lord right now. Stand and sing 452.